Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Adam Levine, and I'm the Executive Director here at the New York Metropolitan Transportation Council, or NYMTC. As the Downstate Region's Metropolitan Planning Organization, NYMTC provides a collaborative planning forum where we address transportation-related issues and develop regional plans through our members' shared vision for the transportation network that connects New York City, Long Island, and the Lower Hudson Valley. Thank you all for participating in today's Brown Bag webinar. Please note that this webinar is eligible for one certification maintenance credit, which can also be logged as an equity credit, no acting necessary, from the American Planning Association, as well as one landscape architecture continuing education credit. You will find more information about all these opportunities in the chat. Our speakers today are from the Landscape Architecture Bureau at the New York State Department of Transportation. We will hear from Lynn Godek, Professional Transportation Architect, and Belle Irwin, Assistant Landscape Architect. Sorry, Belle. Lynn has a Bachelor of Landscape Architecture at SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry in Syracuse and became a licensed landscape architect in 2016. Lynn studied abroad in both Costa Rica and Brazil, participating in community design and planning projects, and began her New York State DOT career in 2008. Belle holds a Bachelor of Science in Landscape Architecture and a Bachelor of Multidisciplinary Studies from West Virginia University. Belle predominantly assists with efforts to advance guidance for accessibility and active transportation across New York State. Lynn and Belle will be telling us about New York State DOT's Access for All program, sharing information about accessible design within the public right-of-way, updates to the latest New York State DOT accessibility standards, and best practices that go above and beyond to achieve accessibility. This will be an interactive presentation with opportunities to provide responses in the chat. Immediately following the presentation, we will have 5 learning assessment questions for the Landscape Architecture Continuing Education credits. This will be followed by an open question and answer session. So feel free to type your questions into the WebEx chat box and we will address them. I also ask that you let us know via the chat who you are and where you're joining us from to help us learn more about our audience. And before I turn the microphone over to Lynn, I'll just add a brief note to please stay tuned for our next Brown Bag webinar on June 25th, where we will be hearing from representatives from the New York Transit Museum about their 50th anniversary. We will be publicizing that event in the coming weeks. After that, our Brown Bag program will take a summer break and we'll resume again in September with 2 webinars. First, a presentation from our September 11th Memorial Fellowship Scholars, followed by an update on the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey's new Midtown Bus Terminal. You'll hear more on those webinars over the summer. Also, please check out our website, www.nymtec.org, for our brand new webpage dedicated to our Brown Bag webinar series, where you can find information on and links to our previous webinars. Thank you again for joining us today, and I will now turn it over to Lynn. Lynn?
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having us today. We are excited to be here. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge our colleague, Kara Hogan, who originally was going to present with us today. Unfortunately, her duties called her down to Long Island, but I would still like to thank her for her time and expertise in preparing the slides for today's presentation. There will be a link in the chat for those of you that are professional landscape architects. If you would like to receive a continuing education credit for this course, please be sure to access the learning assessment form, which can be accessed by the QR code on the screen or from the link that will be dropped into the chat. Those learning assessment questions will be given at the end of the presentation and just prior to our open Q&A session. So without further ado, I will turn over the presentation to Belle Irwin, and she will begin our presentation. Thank you.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you so much. And Lynn, if you'd be able to pull up the presentation onto the screen share, I can go ahead and get started.
I believe I had one more button to push. There we go. And we will get that in presentation mode again. Perfect. So here's that QR code if you would like to scan that now that I am sharing. It is sharing, yes?
I don't see it just yet. You might need to switch monitors.
There's the
You know,
the
we
little
can
otter.
practice
The otter
this
is
a
good.
million
There we
times.
go.
Oh, there we go.
All right. How's that?
Perfect. And that form link is in the chat for people as well. But please
Perfect.
use the QR code if you need to access via your phone.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And this will show up again at the end of the presentation, so don't panic if you're not able to get to it right at the moment. All right. Please start us off, Bill. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lynn, and hello, everyone. So today's presentation, we'll be answering a number of questions about accessibility in the pedestrian environment. Some of the questions we'll answer today are, what is the pedestrian environment? What considerations can make the pedestrian environment more accessible? What considerations can make the pedestrian environment safer? And what considerations can make the pedestrian environment more usable for all? Now, before I get into some statistics, I just want to ask a question, and feel free to type your answers in the chat. What do you think of when you hear the word disability? So, disability statistics, more than 1 in 4, or 28.7% of adults in the United States have some type of disability. 18.2% of adults ages 18 and older have difficulty walking or climbing stairs. 15.7% of adults age 18 and older have difficulty hearing, and 18% of adults ages 18 and older have difficulty seeing. And we often think about wheelchair users typically, since that is the universal symbol for accessibility, but we must consider the way all users navigate in the pedestrian right-of-way. As designers, we must consider vision disabilities, hearing disabilities, physical disabilities, and cognitive disabilities to make sure we have accessible infrastructure. And if we want to take a look at the chat, some of the responses.
Yes, we have one that says something that makes it harder for someone to participate in community without accommodation.
Yeah, and that highlights, the importance of making sure that our infrastructure gets into accessibility to make sure that people don't have barriers when they're using the public right-of-way. I'll go ahead to the next slide regarding accessibility laws. So the next few slides will touch briefly upon some of the features found in the pedestrian environment. The pedestrian environment is made up of sidewalks, crosswalks, both marked and unmarked, shared use trails, and paved shoulders, as well as more. So much of our current transportation system is built upon outdated practices, which assume users are able-bodied, have good vision and hearing, and can understand traffic control devices. Many transportation users, such as children, the elderly, and persons with disabilities, however, do not fit these assumptions. And in order to design a pedestrian environment that is usable by all persons, it is important to understand some of the unique characteristics of pedestrians. And how accessibility laws come into play here is that public rights of way and facilities are required to be accessible for all users through the Americans with Disabilities Act, otherwise known as ADA, and its statutes regardless of funding source. So, some considerations for mobility disabilities. So, persons with mobility disabilities may benefit from firm level surfaces, flush transitions, adequate clear width, curb ramps, and limited cross slope. Again, persons with mobility disabilities often face what we term as movement barriers. So, considerations for visual disabilities. People with vision disabilities may benefit from information conveyed in non-visual formats. This includes making sure the sidewalk or pathway is clearly defined, the use of high color, contrast, or texture to convey boundaries through color contrast or texture differences with detectable warning units or detectable warning surfaces. It's also important that crossing information, pedestrian signals, are designed and constructed to be usable, not just in a way that's seen, but in audible and vibrotactile ways, getting it relayed by sound, getting it relayed by touch. And considerations for hearing disabilities. Persons with hearing disabilities rely on vision. They benefit from good sight lines for assessing street crossing conditions and information in visual or vibrotactile format. As well as following the MUTCD, is important to ensure consistent visual cues for wayfinding. And finally, considerations for cognitive disabilities. It's important to keep signs and signals consistent following the MUTCD so that anywhere you may be, signs are predictable. Again, this is straightforward, direct environments, uncomplicated street crossings, and easy to understand symbols. Now, as we get into relevant laws and regulations, I'm going to pass it back on to Lynn. Thank you so much.
When we talk about compliance with Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, we often hear these three terms incorrectly used interchangeably. Laws, regulations, and standards are not the same thing. They each have a different role in compliance with the ADA. The ADA.gov website provides a perfect summary, which I will read to you. I'm not going to read every slide, but this one I think is important to read to properly understand the differences between these terms. When we talk about what the ADA requires, we are usually referring to two sources. First, the text of the ADA law, also referred to as the ADA statute, passed by Congress in 1990 and then later amended. Second, there are regulations that are developed and adopted by the Department of Justice that the state and local governments and businesses must follow to ensure that they don't discriminate against people with disabilities. And those two statutes, there is Title II regulations, as you can see on the screen, and those are regarding the rights or the responsibilities of the state and local governments and their obligations to protect people with disabilities. And then Title III regulations cover the requirements for public accommodations and commercial facilities. Then there are design standards. Those are the minimum acceptable criteria for achieving accessibility. These standards are established by the U.S. Access Board. They are the federal agency that are delegated that responsibility to establish those minimum standards. Those standards then become the basis for the regulations that are enforceable by law once the U.S. Department of Justice adopts them. Next, I'd like to talk about a few different versions of standards that are available for use and their applicability within the transportation industry. First, we have the 2010 standards for accessible design. This body of guidance is primarily applicable to buildings and sites outside of the right-of-way. And this document is made up of two parts. The first part is the federal code, which requires that any new or altered facilities that are done by public agencies, those are required to be accessible. And then there is also the 2004 Americans with Disabilities Act Accessibility Guidelines. Those two documents combined constitute the 2010 ADA standards. Next, we have the 2006 standards for transportation facilities, which are specifically applicable to public transportation services. And lastly, we have the 1991 accessibility guidelines. These are the predecessor and outdated guidelines, which have been superseded by the 2010 standards, unless we are working on a New York State DOT project that is considered a 1R project, such as a resurfacing project. And when that kind of project affects an existing curb ramp, we will rely on the 1991 guidance for determining if those existing curb ramps will be left in place or brought up to current ADA compliance. Let me back up here. I believe there was a missing slide. Back up here. I'm going to jump ahead and then I'll slip back here. Next is the Americans with Disabilities Act Accessibility Guidelines, or I'm sorry, the PROAG, which was issued in 2023 as a final rule by the Access Board. This is applicable and enforceable for transit stop projects only as an enforceable regulation. And that is because the U.S. Department of Transportation is delegated jurisdiction to adopt standards for regulation for those types of projects only. The public right-of-way accessibility guidelines are, in general, applicable to the public right-of-way. However, they are not adopted by the U.S. Department of Justice at this time, and therefore they are not enforceable regulations. They may, however, be incorporated into state and local government agencies and jurisdictions and others for enforcement for accessibility standards. Next, I'd like to go over a brief history of where the status of the PROAG rulemaking is and where we've come to get to the point where we are today. In 2011, a draft of these guidelines were published and issued, and they have been available since then for use by state and local agencies. In 2013, they were amended to also include requirements for shared use paths. And in 2015, the New York State DOT issued an engineering directive to update our internal procedures for ADA compliance. In 2023, the Access Board published the final rule, and in January of 2025, the US DOT adopted PROAG for the transit stop projects. To date, the US Department of Justice has not adopted PROAG. And then the last standard to discuss is the MUTCD, the Manual for Uniform Traffic Control Devices. These guidelines are applicable, these requirements are applicable to New York State and local roads. So the New York State DOT, effective April of this year, has updated our design guidance. Under our limited revision number 104, those updates are live and posted, although our bulletin issuance has not yet officially been published. So the guidelines are out there and available. They will be applicable for design approval documents as of August 1st and applicable for construction for January 1st letting dates. We are currently working on updates to our standard sheets for sidewalk facilities and for parking facilities. We're anticipating a September 1 effective date, pending the duration of the clearance review, which is pending, and the resolution of comments. So be looking for those later next month for the clearance review. So I would like to summarize the 5 items that are constituting the body of technical requirements that are changing based on this update. Our guidance may seem like it is completely changing, but when we boil it down, it comes to these 5 bullet points. These are the technical changes. First, sidewalk treatments for multi-lane roundabouts and multi-lane channelized turn lanes. When we are designing these facilities, we must incorporate one of 4 treatments. One of the treatments that we must incorporate is the New York State DOT preferred option, which is rectangular rapid flashing beacons. Other options include pedestrian signals, pedestrian hybrid beacon, or a raised pedestrian crossing. Next, the requirements for pedestrian paths at roundabouts and intersections where crossings are not permitted or intended. One of two requirements must be put into place. You must either have a 2-foot minimum separation between the edge of pavement and the sidewalk, or in absence of the separation, you must have in place a vertical detectable edge treatment. The next change has to do with change in grade, which was previously referred to as counterslope. This is a minor change, I would suggest, because the critical element that must be met is the difference between those two counterslopes, which was and still is a maximum of 13.3%. If that is not feasible, then you may provide a 2-foot transitional space. The new requirement for that transitional space is to have a 2.1 running slope. Previously, the guidelines allowed for a 5% running slope on that transitional space. So this is the difference. It is now 2.1 running slope max. Next, there is a minor but significant change to the maximum cross slope allowed for the pedestrian access route. It had always been 2% previously. However, it is now currently 2.1%. And that 1% can make a difference in whether we are leaving a facility in place or justifying it to be left in place for noncompliance. Lastly, the requirements for clear spaces and turning spaces has been updated, and this is significant. The previous guidelines required or allowed for different slope maximums for crosswalks at different types of intersections. Your cross slope for crosswalks could either be 5% or match the grade of road, depending on the type of intersection. With these new guidelines, those same maximum values for the cross slope apply to certain clear spaces and turning spaces at curb ramps and blended transitions when they are associated with a roadway crossing. This is the updated critical elements for the design, layout, and work acceptance of pedestrian facilities, or rather a snippet of it. I want to draw your attention that it has been significantly updated to reflect the changes in these standards and is available on our public-facing website under the Highway Design Manual Chapter 18 website. At this time, I will turn the time over to Belle to describe some designing considerations for accessibility.
So much. So, for summary.
Oh, Belle, you're muted.
Oh, thank you so much, Lynn. I'll take it from here. So, designing for accessibility. So, in summary, we need to plan, design, and construct public right-of-way facilities to be usable by a broad spectrum of users. By doing so, we enable users to travel independently. The facility should accommodate all users. Users shouldn't have to adapt to that facility. It is important to integrate accessible pedestrian facilities into the earliest stages of transportation decision-making, not as an afterthought. This means in planning and determining alternatives, not just in construction. Public outreach can be an important component of this as well, to listen how people use facilities now and what barriers may exist. The right thing to do is design for the most vulnerable user, but it's also the law, as we talked about earlier in this session. So pedestrian circulation paths. So when planning for and designing a pedestrian circulation path, it's best to think of the facility in terms of zones. So this illustration shows the breakdown of a pedestrian circulation path. There is the curb, from the back of the curb to the roadway. labeled at A. B is the frontage zone, the area closest to the curb. C is the pedestrian zone, also called the pedestrian access route. D is the furniture zone, closest to the building. And E is the overhead clearance. So the pedestrian access route, an important part of that is continuous clear width. So 3 feet is needed for one wheelchair user to navigate. 3.5 feet is needed for a person using crutches. 5 feet is needed to turn a wheelchair, and 5 feet is needed for one wheelchair user and a walking companion, or 6 feet needed for 2 wheelchair users. These are the basis for so many of our requirements, thinking about what is needed in a pedestrian environment. The pedestrian access route should be wide enough to accommodate users safely. Design standards and regulations are based on this understanding. Cross slope as well. So same thing with cross slope. It's important to understand that a cross slope that is too steep will result in a pedestrian access route that is not navigable by everyone. In an ideal world, all surfaces would be perfectly level. However, outside in the pedestrian environment, we have to contend with existing elevation changes, entrances to buildings, curb heights that are too tall, parking and drainage concerns. Lots of competing priorities exist in the pedestrian environment. Grade and running slope. So similarly, the running slope can create barriers if not designed and constructed with all users in mind. Sidewalks can follow the roadway grade generally, but we need to be careful in considering how sidewalks intersect with driveways so as to not create driveway coasters where the slope goes up and down and jostles the user. And we also need to think about intersections generally. We want to avoid bumps in grade when sidewalks interact. And a curb ramp could be thought of to be broken down into these parts. So design standards have a lot of key considerations with these elements. So the terminology for a compliant ramp, the elements are and when they're needed. So there's the turning space, also called the landing, the clear space, the clear area. So these are areas and spaces for orienting. Grade breaks, the detectable warning surface, which we'll discuss in just a moment, and the side flares. So I just dropped that term detectable warning surface, or DWS. So what is a detectable warning surface? So these are raised truncated domes in a rectangular unit. You place them across the bottom of the curb, and they aid those who may be visually impaired to identify the end of the ramp. Detecting a detectable warning surface means pause before proceeding. And it's important to make sure that the detectable warning surfaces span the entire width of the ramp. So you don't want individuals who are looking to detect the detectable warning surface to miss it. So it needs to make sure that it's spanning that whole width. And I will pass it back on to Lynn. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bill. So once we have left the curb ramp as a pedestrian, we now enter the roadway. And for accessibility, it's really important to consider the length, the crossing distance, and the timing for these pedestrian crossings. Lengthy crossing distances are difficult for pedestrians, especially those for persons with mobility limitations, such as those using walkers, canes, and so on. Recognizing this, it's important to minimize the crossing distance as much as possible. There are many factors that affect our crossing distance, some helping to shorten the distance, others helping to lengthen the distance. Some of these factors include the number of travel lanes, how wide the lane widths are, what the curb radius is, whether we are adding medians or pedestrian refuge islands, adding curb extensions, also called bulb outs, or trying to remember what the other term for that was. So also parking lanes can add to the width. And then there's also bike lanes and transit lanes. These are all important factors in considering the appropriate length of a crossing. Crossing timing is also another consideration, and we want to consider the needs of our slowest and vulnerable users. Next, let's talk a little bit about accessible pedestrian signals. In order to ensure that pedestrian signal communications are inclusive of persons with visual impairments, it's important to provide pedestrian signals that are usable in various formats, both audible and vibrotactile. Research shows that pedestrians in general will move and cross together and faster when there is an audible signal present, and this will help to reduce vehicle delay when they are moving together. The location of accessible pedestrian signals should take into consideration many key elements to ensure that they're usable by all. These elements include color contrast, alignment that is parallel toward the direction of travel so that it is intuitive which button to press for your crossing. Having a raised tactile arrow that is also vibrotactile, giving a feedback response that the button has been activated and is now available for use and responsive. Also, having a rapid tick locator can help persons with vision impairments to hear and navigate toward the accessible pedestrian signal. There are several maintenance considerations that must be put into place when we are ensuring that our facilities are ADA compliant. Our job is not done once construction is over. When we own these facilities, we must also take care to maintain them or oversee that they are being maintained. Some sidewalk maintenance problems that can pose a barrier include buckled and cracked sidewalks, depressed sidewalk segments that can begin to create a vertical barrier, even if it's a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch, can become a barrier. Overgrown vegetation, snow and ice accumulation, pavers that are heaved or damaged, drainage issues, trees and roots can cause damage to sidewalk. Plows can cause damage to detectable warning surfaces, or we could have unresponsive pedestrian signals. Also, during construction and maintenance, during construction, the public right-of-way can be particularly hazardous to pedestrians with visual or mobility impairments. Using caution tape and traffic cones alone are not acceptable. We need to maintain features of facilities in order to provide ready access to individuals with disabilities and provide alternate pedestrian access routes to the extent practical when an existing pedestrian access route is blocked by construction, alteration, maintenance, or other temporary conditions. We need to make sure that the temporary route must be detectable and include accessibility features, including curb ramps where necessary. As I said, cones and construction tape are not adequate to warn pedestrians with visual disabilities of the route closure and the path guidance to temporary routes. Rather, a continuous detectable edge must be provided throughout the length of the project. The MUTCD provides examples that can help, as well as the New York State DOT standard sheets. When we are designing alternate pedestrian access route, it is required that an existing pedestrian circulation path or alternate pedestrian access routes are required when the existing facilities are effective. And those alternate pedestrian access routes need to include sidewalks, shared use paths, crosswalks, pedestrian signals, access to transit stops and shelters. Each of the elements that were previously existing along that pedestrian access route must also be provided during construction for the temporary alternate route. And locating those temporary facilities on the same side as the existing is preferred. Construction and maintenance activities can have a significant impact to the accessibility of pedestrian routes. But there's many ways that we can minimize and avoid those impacts for pedestrians. By phasing construction, utilizing detailed plans, we can consider using a multi-lane project and build sidewalks early on in the project. We can build sidewalks that are wide enough on bridges to accommodate temporary pedestrian and bicycle traffic where needed. We can work on one side of the street at a time, and so on. Implementing detailed plans for the maintenance and protection of traffic, including pedestrian detours, is critical when the pedestrian route is affected. Signs placed in advance at the beginning of the block at accessible crossing points. We need to consider visual impairments and effective communications. It's also critical to not place signs within the pedestrian access route or bike lane. Temporary barricades need to be detectable by white cane, not just cones and tape, as we've said previously. We can also take advantage of public information and public announcements to provide the public with information about when a route will be affected and where the alternate routes are located. Lastly, we would like to share a couple of other key requirements that can help to improve accessibility. The first one is ADA transition plans. This is a federal requirement for all state and local governments with 50 or more employees. They'll need to perform a self-evaluation of their current facilities, their current services, policies, and practices that do not or may not meet ADA requirements. That public agency must develop a transition plan addressing those deficiencies. They also need to schedule when improvements will be made. This plan must also be updated periodically. Locals that are developing transition plans need to reflect the processes utilized by state DOTs, MPOs, and transition agencies to develop the statewide transportation improvement program and metropolitan transportation improvement programs. Next, our projects. Public agencies should work to meet accessibility requirements throughout the project delivery process. Issues surrounding pedestrian accessibility should be addressed at the earliest stage possible to reduce or prevent conflicts with other right-of-way, planning, environmental, and design considerations. This could include acquiring right-of-way and the use of special plan details for specific locations to remove barriers. Projects requiring pedestrian accessibility include not just new construction, but also alterations to the existing facilities. Lastly, we would like to ask you to participate and put some answers in the chat for us. Considering all that we've talked about today, we'd like you to look at this image and consider how you would replace this facility. It's not always the best solution to replace in kind. So what are some things that you might do differently if you were redesigning the facility that you see here? And to just verbally describe, we have a driveway that is cutting through a sidewalk facility. At each end of that sidewalk, we have a detectable warning surface that appears to have the domes that are no longer there. We also have a third sidewalk that is entering that driveway with what appears to be a detectable warning surface.
Would you like to hear some of the answers now?
Yes, please.
Okay, great.
Yes, please read out the answers.
First, I just wanted to throw out, someone else had responded to your question about what do you think of when you hear the word disability? And it just said something that can impact anyone at any time. Disability doesn't look any one way and sometimes is invisible. Okay, and in regards to, there was also a quick question I wanted to throw out there before it gets lost. As a New Jersey planner, can they be pointed out to the links referencing comparable New Jersey accessibility standards and regulations? That's something that we could, I could put into the chat if need be.
Yeah, let's address that later.
Great. And then, so the questions about that image are, remove the textured pavement in the driveway, connect the southwest system on the far side and have one crossing, make it all one level, provide it level landing surfaces, modify the sidewalks and ramps so that it can be, you can walk straight, remove DWS, I'm not sure what that is, I'm sorry, it's not needed at the minor
okay.
residential driveway, straighten the sidewalk so that the ramp and DWIs are perpendicular to the driveway, move the bent and consolidate the two ramps into one ramp, straighten out the truncated domes and align the approach ramps to make it a straight walk, even out or replace the bricks, add more flare space, make the crossing area flat instead of bricks, add the crosswalk with high contrast, change the driveway to pedestrian only and orientation of the DWS, keep the walking path at grade and remove the driveway coasters, consider replacing the bricks with another surface and realign sidewalk. So, lots of great feedback.
Lots of great feedback. So I'm going to, if I doodle on this, do you see my drawing here?
Yes, that works.
Awesome. Okay. So I'm going to do a little doodle here. Absolutely, we want to realign and connect the sidewalk so that we have a nice continuous sidewalk. I loved the suggestion to keep it at grade so that we don't have a driveway coaster. If we need to, we can create a little bit of a slope onto the driveway here. It might not be feasible to keep it level. If there's drainage issues, we might have to lower it, but maybe we lower it over time. You know, we can take maybe 10 or 15 feet to lower that sidewalk. But yeah, we would love to see this be a concrete, continuous sidewalk going through this driveway. That is one of the key things that I would suggest. And then regarding these placement of these detectable warning surfaces, it is actually not appropriate at all for them to be here. This is a minor driveway and detectable warning surfaces are not to be placed at the end of a pedestrian ramp along a sidewalk facility. So in this instance, this is the pedestrian access route, and these would not be considered a curb ramp, but a pedestrian ramp. So those detectable warning surfaces would be omitted in this instance. All right, great job, everyone. Thank you so much for your responses. I'm going to go ahead and clear my annotations, I think. Okay, perfect. And next, we are going to proceed with our learning assessment. So here is that QR code once again. For those of you that are landscape architects, a registered landscape architect, you may access the link in the chat or use a mobile device to pull up the QR code for that form. For the purposes of this landscape architecture credit, I will be reading the questions only and allowing you to answer those questions on your own in the form. So you do not need to put the answers into the chat. At the conclusion of the learning assessment, if you have any questions, about that, we can address them in the open Q&A. Okay, the first question, true or false? The U.S. Access Board is responsible for adopting technical standards which become the basis for regulations adopted by the U.S. Department of Justice.
That's like.
Number 2, true or false? The U.S. Department of Transportation has adopted the 2023 PROAG for all transportation projects. Number 3, true or false? By following the MUTCD, the Manual for Uniform Traffic Control Devices, designers can ensure that signs, signals, and pavement markings are accessible for all pedestrians with disabilities, including visual, cognitive, and hearing disabilities. Number 4, a required treatment at a multi-lane roundabout or multi-lane channelized turn lane is one of any of the following: a rapid rectangular flashing beacon, pedestrian signal, pedestrian hybrid beacon, and a raised pedestrian crossing. And lastly, true or false? Designers that have only considered the needs of pedestrians with mobility impairments have designed a facility that is accessible for all pedestrians. Okay, does anyone need more time with the learning assessment questions? Please chime in to the chat if you would like more time.
Nothing about more time yet, but we are starting to get more questions, open-ended questions.
Perfect, then let's go on to the questions.
So before we get into that, can maybe the folks with that need the landscape architecture credit cover their ears? Because I'd like to know what the answers are. I want to see if I got them right.
I think it's fine. Our open Q&A session is now open, so please feel free to ask any questions that you have.
All right, I'm going to kick it off with the question I've got, and then we can go into the chat. So folks, feel free to throw more questions into the chat while I'm asking mine, which is so I worked in the regional offices myself at State DOT prior to coming here to NYMTC, and so I was familiar with the rectangular rapid flashing beacons as they were starting to get rolled out, and there was certainly a lot of, I guess, maybe not confusion, but certainly folks were trying to understand what this was, and perhaps they weren't using them as much. Then they started to grow in popularity. Now it seems like perhaps they're more common, but I guess I'm wondering from your perspective, how well are they being used? How well are they adopted? Is it becoming more normal, I guess?
I do believe that the rapid rectangular flashing beacons, or RRFBs, are fairly common for DOT to use. I do think that the public understanding and perception of what they are for and how they are used is not necessarily widely known and understood. They are intended to enhance the crosswalk, and provide a little bit more of visual alert with the flashing, and they're pedestrian activated. So when a pedestrian's ready to cross the road, they'll push the button, and then cross. As far as any statistics on their effectiveness, I don't know the answer to that question, but I would say that yes, they are more common in more recent years.
From my experience in the traffic offices, the improvement of safety is marked. I mean, it's a high percentage. So yeah, they're really good. So and I guess pedestrian hybrid beacons are perhaps not as common, what I guess used to be called hawks.
Yes.
But they also have I think similar improvements. So really
Yep.
cool.
Yep.
I don't know, Stephanie, do we have any questions in the chat yet?
Yes, we do. The question about a New Jersey planner, can you point me to the links referencing comparable New Jersey accessibility standards and regulations? Might that be accessible from a federal website, or I can just throw something in the chat if need be?
Yeah, so that's actually a really good question. I am personally not familiar with any New Jersey specific accessibility standards and regulations. The accessibility standards and regulations that New York State applies are the federal standards. So we adopt those and use them. So what I can do is I can pull up the access board. Here, I'm going to stop presenting for a moment, and I'm going to go find that access board link and drop that into the chat for you. And that is where I would suggest going for a comprehensive set of standards for accessibility guidelines.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Just for the audience, we have both the landscape architect form that has been referenced, and also this session also you can get both APA, American Planning Association certification maintenance credits for AICP, and also APA equity credits. So 3 credits available for this brown bag, and those links are in the chat as well. Yes, we have a great job, Lynn and Belle, as usual. Comment from you guys. And then there is a question, is there any consideration to give the priority to the pedestrian and keep sidewalks flash level and let the drivers to navigate raised sidewalks, in which becomes very popular in European cities?
Yes, absolutely. That is definitely an important design consideration. We in general want to protect our vulnerable road users as much as we can. And so by keeping the sidewalk at the same elevation, visually gives that priority by making the accessible route the same material, a concrete throughout driveway openings. It visually shows to the driver that that is the pedestrian facility and they have the right of way. When I have seen instances when the asphalt is the predominant feature throughout the sidewalk section, and it visually indicates that the driver has predominant use of that area. So I would definitely agree with that.
Thank you so much. And then a thank you, much appreciated, regarding the link to the PROAG, and that is in the chat as well. The access board, as Lynn noted, for anyone else who would like to access it, it just shows all of the requirements. And I believe that's the last of the general comments. I don't think I'm missing anything. So Adam, if you had anything else, but I'll continue to look at the chat and see if anything
That'd be
else
great.
comes
So, I mean, for those of us who are old enough to remember a world prior to the Americans with Disabilities Act, I mean, it was everyone was, every man and woman for themselves in terms of trying to navigate. And that's even for the folks who had visible disabilities. Never mind the folks whose disabilities were perhaps invisible. So to see this evolve over the years and how far it's come and how much, I'm not great, but how much better things are than they used to be is really great. And it's due to the work that you guys are doing. So it's really very much appreciated. Thank you. I also wanted
you.
to make a pitch for, and I don't know if we can perhaps toss it in the chat, but you're going to be presenting at the Walk, Bike, and Roll Symposium next week, right?
That's
Tuesday,
right.
June 2nd?
Yep.
Do you want to maybe
I'll
talk
give a
about that for a
shameless
moment?
plug on that.
Yeah.
Yep. So, in fact, that's the reason why you guys invited me
Yeah.
today. One of you saw that we were presenting at Walk, Bike, Roll on next week, Tuesday. And I will also put in a plug for NYSDOT, New York State Transportation Association of Transportation Engineers. I will also be presenting on Thursday at that event. So if any of you are attending, I hope you come to our session. It is going to be interactive and outdoors with an exciting indoor display. And I hope you all come see me and Belle at Walk, Bike, Roll.
Stephanie,
I
you got
think
it.
I put
Got
the
it.
link in the
Okay,
chat. I believe
perfect.
that's the correct one. Yes.
Still time to register. Lots of
Yeah,
great
yeah.
presentations. Lynn
A
is going
lot
to be
of
there,
good
and
presentations.
NYMTC's going to be giving a presentation. We're all going to be gathering
Perfect.
to share all this great information. So
Yeah.
thank you again.
And hopefully we see some of you guys at the bike ride too on Monday night.
Yeah.
Seeing lots of hands clapping and on
Yeah.
WebEx here. So great work, everybody.
Lynn and Belle, thank you again. And to Kara, who wasn't able to join us, but who definitely contributed to this presentation, thank you again. Really appreciate it. Very important subject. And everyone that joined us, thank you and have a wonderful day. And to the NYMTC team as well, thank you for putting this together. Everybody. Take care,
Thank you,
everybody.
everyone. Have a great night. Have a
Thank
great
you
rest of
all.
your
Yep.
Thank
too.
you,
Thanks.
everyone.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you all.